All right, so we are just want to remind you from last year what you've talked about in 6th grade. You talked about rates, ratios, and proportions. So just a reminder, you've already talked about rates, ratios, and proportions. So when we set up a proportion, first we have to figure out what two units are we comparing. Is it miles to minutes? Is it degrees to hours? We're going to write the units as a ratio. So if we look at this first example, you just traveled 40 miles in 30 minutes. The question is, how far will we travel in 45 minutes? So we have to figure out what two units are being compared. So what's being compared? 40 miles in 30 minutes. So our units are miles and minutes. Okay, so that's what we're comparing. And remember, we can write ratios 3 ways. We can write ratios as fractions, so miles over ratios. We can write it in sentence form like we did up here. And one other way, we could write it using a colon, so miles dot minutes. Miles to minutes, okay? So you can write it either way. Most commonly, you're going to see it written as a fraction. So you're going to see it most commonly in this form, okay? In fraction form. So once we write it as a ratio, we look at the information we have left and identify what's missing. So we have to figure out what's missing. So what is the question actually asking? What are we trying to find? What are we trying to do here? Hopefully you said we're trying to find the distance. The distance we go in 45 minutes. Okay. So that's what we're trying to do. So we're going to use a proportion. So I want to remind you, a proportion is when you set two fractions equal to each other. When you have two fractions equal to each other, just like we have here. And just like we had before with our ratio, we have miles over minutes. So we put everything that has to do with miles on the top. So we have 40 miles over 30 minutes. And then we don't know how many miles we can go in 45 minutes. That's what we're trying to figure out. So to solve a proportion, in order to solve a proportion, we cross multiply and then solve. So we multiply diagonally. So we would multiply 30 times x. And what does that give us? Hopefully you said 30x. 30 times x is 30x. And then what do we get when we multiply 40 times 45? That's going to be 1,800. So we've cross-multiplied. Now we just need to divide. So again, I want to get that x alone. So how can I get x alone? I divide both sides by 30. Okay. So when I divide that, I'm going to get 60 miles. This label here is super important because that tells us what unit it is. It tells us what our unit is. Okay. So down here below is just another example of how to solve a proportion. So they cross multiplied and got 16x. and they cross multiplied and got 80. And then you have to get rid of this coefficient, have to get rid of that so we can get x alone, and do that by dividing both sides by 16. Okay, that's all you do to solve a proportion. So let's look at the next page. So let's set up a couple more examples here. So 12 gallons of gas cost $30. 12 gallons cost $30. How much will we get for an additional 12 gallons? Sorry, for an additional 4 gallons of gas. So the first thing we do is figure out, what are we comparing? What are we talking about, and write it as a ratio. So we're talking about gallons over dollars. So we're talking about gallons over dollars, and that's what I'm going to write here. Gallons over dollars. Okay. We're going to do another ratio. What do we already know? So we know that we have gallons over dollars. Are we given a set amount of gallons already? We're given 12 gallons over how many dollars? Over $30. So that's our other ratio. And what are we looking for? What are we looking for in the problem? We're looking for the cost of 4 extra gallons. So we're looking for the cost of 4 gallons. So we're going to set up our proportion now. So we know that we have gallons over dollars. And we know that our first 12 gallons of gas cost $30. We're going to set that equal to an additional 4 gallons of gas over an unknown amount of money, because that's what we're trying to figure out. So we want everything with money on the same side and everything with the amount on the other. So again, we cross multiply. So 12 times x is 12x. So we do 12x equals, again, cross multiply, 30 times 4. 30 times 4 is 120. And then I have to get this x alone. So I do that by dividing both sides by 12. And I get x is equal to what? 10. But 10 what? 10 gallons, $10, 10 billion cents, 10 hares, 10 penguins, $10. Okay. And that's all.